Keanu Reeves stood quietly in the bustling dining room of his own restaurant, Reeves Retreat, his scruffy beard and worn-out cap a stark contrast to the polished image fans know him by. A rude manager nearby glared at him with blatant disrespect, his temper flaring like a storm about to break. But what happened next would leave the entire staff and even the customers in absolute shock, changing lives in ways no one saw coming. Before we dive into this wild tale, drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from. If you love gripping stories like this, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow, we've got another unforgettable story waiting for you. Keanu Reeves stood quietly in the shadow of his own creation, a man whose name was synonymous with Hollywood blockbusters and quiet kindness, yet here he was, far removed from the glitz of red carpets. He was the proud owner of Reeves Retreat, a chain of 15 cozy restaurants scattered across the country, each one born from his deep love for food and a philosophy rooted in compassion. What had started as a passion project, a place where good meals and human connection could thrive, had grown into something he held dear, a testament to his belief that everyone deserved a seat at the table, both literally and figuratively. But lately, that vision felt like it was slipping through his fingers. Over the past few months, troubling whispers had reached his ears. Complaints about slow service, rude staff, and an atmosphere that felt more like a pressure cooker than a welcoming retreat. It wasn't the dream he'd built from scratch, and it gnawed at him. Keanu had always trusted his team, a group of regional managers who'd assured him time and again that everything was running smoothly. Their reports painted a picture of efficiency. Sales were steady, schedules were met, and customers were happy. But the emails and online reviews trickling in told a different story. One customer wrote about waiting 40 minutes for a cold plate of fries. Another described a waiter snapping at them over a simple request. Worst of all, employee turnover had spiked, with staff quitting faster than they could be replaced. The numbers didn't add up, and the disconnect between what he was told and what he was hearing left him restless. Keanu wasn't the type to sit in an office and let problems fester. He'd never been that guy. If something was wrong with his restaurants, he needed to see it for himself, unfiltered and raw. So he made a plan. He'd go undercover, slipping into one of his own locations to uncover the truth behind the polished reports. He picked a spot on the outskirts of Los Angeles, a quiet suburban town where the pace was slower and the faces less likely to clock him as the Keanu Reeves. It was far enough from the corporate hub that no one there had ever met him in person, and that was exactly what he needed. To pull it off, he ditched the sleek leather jackets and tailored looks that fans might recognize from a mile away. Instead, he let his beard grow out into a scruffy mess, tugged on an old gray baseball cap, and threw on a faded hoodie that had seen better days. A pair of thick-rimmed glasses, more prop than prescription, completed the disguise, turning him into just another guy looking for a bite to eat. He caught a glimpse of himself in the mirror before heading out and smirked. Even his own mother might have walked past him on the street. The drive to the restaurant took just over an hour, the city's sprawl giving way to tree-lined streets and strip malls. As he pulled into the parking lot of Reeves Retreat, he felt a mix of anticipation and unease. This place was supposed to embody everything he stood for: warmth, respect, a little slice of comfort in a chaotic world. But the complaints suggested otherwise, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd let it drift too far from his grasp. Keanu took a deep breath, adjusted his cap, and stepped out of the car. Whatever was waiting inside, he was ready to face it head-on. Keanu pushed open the door to Reeves Retreat just as the lunch rush hit its peak, the chime above jingling faintly over the hum of chatter and clinking dishes. The air inside buzzed with noise, but it lacked the lively warmth he'd always imagined for his restaurants. It wasn't dead, exactly, just off, like a song played slightly out of tune. He scanned the room, taking it all in. The booths lining the walls were scuffed and faded, their red vinyl peeling at the edges, and the wooden tables bore the scars of years of use. A few framed photos hung crookedly on the walls, their colors washed out by time. This wasn't the inviting haven he'd envisioned when he'd poured his heart into the brand. It felt more like a relic struggling to keep up. He slid into a booth near the window, tugging his cap lower as he settled in. The place wasn't empty. Families chattered over plates of burgers, and a couple of lone diners sipped coffee while scrolling their phones. But the energy was strained, the kind of busy that felt more chaotic than welcoming. Before long, a young waitress approached, her sneakers squeaking faintly against the linoleum floor. Her name tag read Lily, and though she flashed a smile, it didn't reach her tired eyes. Dark circles shadowed her face and her shoulders slumped slightly, as if carrying an invisible weight. "Hi, welcome to Reeves' retreat," she said, her voice bright but brittle like glass about to crack. "Can I get you started with something to drink?" "Just coffee, black," Keanu replied, keeping his tone casual. She nodded quickly, scribbling on her notepad before darting off. He watched her weave through the tables, her movements swift but mechanical, refilling a water glass here, clearing a plate there, never pausing to catch her breath. She was good at her job, that much was clear, but she looked stretched thin, like a rubber band ready to snap. Keanu leaned back, sipping the coffee she brought a minute later, and kept his eyes on her. The brew was decent, strong enough to wake him up, but it didn't distract him from the unease settling in his gut. Then it happened. A burly guy in a plaid shirt at a nearby table waved Lily over, his voice cutting through the din like a knife. "Hey, this chicken's cold as hell," he barked, shoving the plate toward her. "What's the deal?" Lily froze for a split second, before rushing to apologize. "I'm so sorry, sir, I'll get it fixed right away," she said, her hands trembling as she reached for the dish. "The guy wasn't having it. You should have gotten it right the first time," he snapped, loud enough for heads to turn. "Do your damn job." Lily's face flushed red, but she kept her head down, muttering another apology as she hurried off. Keanu's grip tightened around his mug. This wasn't just a bad day. This was wrong, and it hit him harder than he'd expected. Keanu had just taken his first bite of the burger, juicy, decently seasoned, though the bun was a little stale, when a muffled sound caught his ear. It came from the kitchen, faint at first, barely audible over the lunchtime clamor, but it grew clearer as he set the burger down and tilted his head, sobbing, sharp, broken sobs that punched through the thin wall separating the dining room from the back. His stomach twisted and he pushed his plate aside, straining to listen. The voice was unmistakable. It was Lily, the waitress who'd been juggling tables like her life depended on it. Something was wrong, and he couldn't sit there pretending it wasn't happening. He slid out of the booth, his boots quiet against the floor, and made his way toward the swinging kitchen doors. The closer he got, the louder the sounds became. Lily's cries mixed with a harsh, barking voice that drowned her out. Keanu nudged the door open just enough to slip inside, and the scene hit him like a slap. Lily stood near the prep counter, her back to the wall, her hands trembling as she wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her uniform. Tears streaked her flushed cheeks and her breath hitched in shaky gasps. Looming over her was a stocky guy in his late 30s, his apron stained with grease and his face twisted in a scowl. His name tag read, Dave, Shift Manager, and he was in the middle of tearing into her. "What's taking so damn long, Lily?" he shouted, his voice booming in the cramped space. "You're slowing everything down. If you can't keep up, maybe you shouldn't be here. I'll find someone who can." Lily flinched at every word, her shoulders hunching as if she could shrink away from him. "I'm trying," she choked out, her voice cracking. "It's been crazy out there, and I'm doing my best." Dave snorted, crossing his arms. "Your best? Your best is screwing us all. You're useless, you know that?" "Useless!" The word landed like a punch and Lily's head dropped, her sobs growing louder. Two other cooks, a lanky kid with a mop of curls and an older guy with a tired face, kept their eyes glued to their cutting boards, chopping vegetables with mechanical precision. They wouldn't look up, wouldn't intervene, their silence screaming discomfort. Keanu's jaw tightened, his hands curling into fists at his sides. He'd seen enough in 5 seconds to know this wasn't just a rough moment. This was a pattern, and it was everything he'd built his restaurants to stand against. He took a step forward, keeping his voice low but steady. "Hey," he said, loud enough to cut through Dave's tirade. "Is there a problem here?" Dave whipped around, startled, his scowl deepening when he saw Keanu standing there in his hoodie and cap. "Who the hell are you?" he snapped, his tone dripping with disdain. "This is my kitchen, not your business. Back off." Lily glanced up, her red-rimmed eyes meeting Keanu's for a fleeting second, a mix of confusion and desperation flickering in them. Keanu held Dave's glare, his pulse pounding but his face calm. "Just asking," he said evenly, though the anger simmering beneath his words was hard to miss. Dave huffed, turning back to Lily. "Get it together or get out," he barked, brushing past Keanu like he was nothing. But Keanu wasn't going anywhere. Not yet. Keanu stood rooted in the kitchen, the air thick with tension as Lily's quiet sobs echoed off the tiled walls. He couldn't let this slide, not after what he'd just seen. He took a slow breath, steadying himself, and stepped closer to Dave, his voice calm but firm. "She needs a break," he said, nodding toward Lily, who was still trembling against the counter. "Let her sit down for 5 minutes." Dave spun around, his face contorting into a sneer, his eyes narrowing as he sized Keanu up. "A break?" he scoffed, his tone dripping with mockery. "We're short-staffed, genius. No one gets a break during the rush. If she's too weak to handle it, she can quit." "I won't cry over it." He waved a hand dismissively, as if Lily were a fly he could swat away. Lily's head jerked up at the words, her tear-streaked face paling, but she didn't say anything, just bit her lip hard enough to leave a mark. Keanu's chest tightened. He knew that look, the one people wore when they'd been beaten down too long. Before he could respond, a voice piped up from the corner. It was the lanky kid with the curls, his knife paused mid-chop. "She's been here 8 hours straight, Dave," he said, his tone hesitant but edged with defiance. "No breaks, no water, nothing. That's why she's falling behind." His name tag read Ethan, and though he kept his eyes on the cutting board, his words hung heavy in the air. Dave's head snapped toward Ethan, his scowl darkening. "You want to join her on the unemployment line, kid?" he barked, taking a step toward him. "Keep your mouth shut and do your job, or I'll make sure you're both out the door by tonight." Ethan flinched, but didn't back down completely, his grip tightening on the knife handle. The older cook beside him stayed silent, his shoulders hunching further as if he could disappear into the counter. Keanu's patience was fraying fast. He squared his shoulders, locking eyes with Dave. "Sounds like the problem's not them," he said, his voice low and steady. "If your team's this burned out, maybe it's on how you're running things." Dave's face flushed red, veins bulging at his temples. "Who the hell do you think you are?" he roared, his voice bouncing off the walls. "Some random nobody waltzing in here to tell me how to do my job? I've kept this dump afloat for 2 years. You don't get to lecture me." He swung an arm out, his hand slamming into a metal frying pan on the counter. The pan flew off, crashing to the floor with a deafening clang that reverberated through the kitchen. The noise cut through everything. Lily's sobs turned into a sharp gasp. Ethan froze, and even the chatter from the dining room faltered as heads turned toward the commotion. Customers peeked through the serving window, murmuring to each other, their curiosity piqued by the chaos. Lily's cries broke into something raw, louder, her hands flying to her face as she sank back against the wall. Dave didn't even glance at her, he was too busy glaring at Keanu, his chest heaving with rage. "You think you're tough, huh?" he spat, stepping closer until he was inches from Keanu's face. "Get out of my kitchen before I throw you out myself." Keanu didn't budge, his expression unreadable but his eyes burning with a quiet fury. He'd seen bullies like Dave before, loud, mean, and hollow, and he wasn't about to let this one win. "You're making this worse for everyone," he said evenly, his voice cutting through Dave's bluster. "Step back and think about what you're doing." Dave's lips curled into a snarl, but for a split second his bravado flickered. He wasn't used to being challenged like this, and it threw him off. The kitchen hung in a tense, electric silence, waiting for the next move. The kitchen simmered with tension, Lily's muffled sobs and Ethan's quiet defiance hanging in the air. Dave stood inches from Keanu, his face twisted in a snarl, still riding the high of his own rage. "Get out before I make you," he spat, his voice a low growl, certain he'd won. Keanu didn't blink. He reached into his hoodie pocket, pulled out a worn leather wallet, and flipped it open with a flick of his wrist. He slid out a black card and held it up. The Reeves Retreat logo gleamed, followed by Keanu Reeves, owner, in sharp, embossed letters. Dave's eyes locked onto it, and the color drained from his face like water from a cracked glass. "You're—" Dave's voice cracked, his bravado evaporating mid-sentence. His hands twitched at his sides, the sneer replaced by a wide-eyed panic. "No, wait, I didn't—" Keanu cut him off, his tone cold and final. "I've seen enough." He tucked the card away, stepping closer, his presence towering without effort. "You're done." Dave's mouth opened and closed, a fish gasping for air. "Mr. Reeves, I didn't know it was you," he stammered, his voice trembling now, sweat beading on his forehead. "I'm sorry, Sorry doesn't fix this," Keanu said, his words sharp as a blade. "You bullied my staff, you scared them into silence, you turned my place into something I don't recognize. That stops now." Dave flinched, his shoulders hunching as if he could shrink away from the judgment in Keanu's eyes. I kept this place running. he tried, desperation clawing at his tone. "You can't just—" "I can," Keanu snapped, his voice rising just enough to silence him. "And I am. You're fired. Get out!" Dave froze, his breath hitching, the reality sinking in like a punch to the gut. Customers beyond the serving window erupted into applause, a wave of cheers rolling through the dining room, but Dave barely heard it. His hands shook as he fumbled for words. "Please," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I've got bills, a family. I didn't mean it, I swear." Keanu's gaze didn't waver, hard and unflinching. "You made your choice when you treated them like dirt," he said, nodding toward Lily and Ethan. "You don't get to beg your way out of that. Leave." Dave's face crumpled, fear giving way to a hollow resignation. He yanked off his apron with trembling hands, the fabric slipping through his fingers as he threw it down. "You'll regret this," he muttered, but the threat was empty, his voice barely a whisper. He turned and stumbled toward the back door, nearly tripping in his haste to escape the weight of Keanu's stare. The applause grew louder as Dave disappeared, the kitchen falling silent except for Lily's shaky breaths. Keanu turned to her and Ethan, his expression softening but still firm. "You didn't deserve that," he said quietly. "No one does." Lily wiped her eyes, nodding faintly while Ethan let out a relieved breath. The cheers from the dining room faded, but the shift was clear. Justice had walked in, and it wasn't leaving. The kitchen door swung shut behind Dave, his frantic footsteps fading into the hum of the dining room's chatter. The air felt lighter, like a storm had passed, but the weight of what had happened lingered in Lily's red-rimmed eyes and Ethan's tense shoulders. Keanu pulled a stool from the corner and sat down, motioning for them to join him. Lily hesitated, wiping her cheeks with her sleeve, then perched on the edge of a crate. Ethan leaned against the counter, arms crossed, his guard still up. The other cook slipped out quietly, leaving the three of them alone in the cramped space. Keanu took off his cap, running a hand through his messy hair, and looked at them with a sincerity that cut through the silence. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice low but steady. "I should have been here sooner. I let this go on too long and you paid the price for it. That's on me." Lily blinked, surprised, her fingers twisting the hem of her apron. Ethan's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. Keanu leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I need to know what's been happening, really happening. No reports, no filters, just the truth." Lily swallowed hard, glancing at Ethan before speaking. "It's been non-stop," she said, her voice shaky but gaining strength. "We're always short-staffed. Dave wouldn't let us rest. 8-10 hours sometimes, no breaks. If we slowed down, he'd yell, threaten to fire us. I couldn't keep up, but I couldn't leave either. I need this job." Her eyes dropped, shame creeping in. "I kept messing up, and he made sure I knew it." Ethan nodded, uncrossing his arms. "She's not exaggerating. Dave ran this place like a dictator, screaming, cutting corners, blaming us for everything. I stayed because I didn't want to ditch her or the others. We're a team, you know. But it's been hell." His voice cracked slightly, betraying the exhaustion he'd been hiding. "I thought about quitting a dozen times, but then who'd have Lily's back?" Keanu listened, his face unreadable but his eyes dark with regret. He straightened up, exhaling slowly. "That's not what this place is supposed to be," he said. "I built Reeves Retreat to be a refuge, for customers, for you, not a pressure cooker. That changes now." He met their gazes, firm and resolute. "I'm hiring more people starting tomorrow. No more running on fumes. Better hours, better conditions, you'll get breaks, decent pay, and respect. And for sticking it out through this mess, you're both getting a bonus. You've earned it." Lily's mouth parted in disbelief, a faint hope flickering in her eyes. Ethan cracked a small, tired smile. "For real?" he asked. Keanu nodded. "For real. You're the heart of this place. I'm not letting that get crushed again." The promise hung between them, a quiet vow to rebuild what Dave had broken. The next day, Keanu returned to Reeves Retreat, the morning sun casting long shadows across the parking lot. He'd spent the night restless, replaying the previous day's events, determined to set things right. The dining room buzzed with a cautious energy. Lily moved with a bit more ease. Ethan cracked a rare joke to a coworker, and the promise of change hung in the air. Keanu lingered near the counter, sipping coffee, watching the team settle into a rhythm. He'd already called in reinforcements, new hires were on the way, and he'd scheduled a meeting with regional managers to root out any other Daves lurking in his chain. For the first time in months, he felt a flicker of hope. Then the door swung open and trouble walked in. A group of 5 stormed through, 3 men and 2 women, loud and brash, their voices cutting over the hum of conversation. They claimed a booth, barking orders before Lily could even hand out menus. "Make it quick, sweetheart," one man snapped, a wiry guy with a buzz cut and a smirk. "We're not here to wait." Lily froze, her tray trembling slightly, the confidence she'd started to rebuild crumbling. I'll get right on it," she stammered, hurrying off. Keanu's grip tightened on his mug, his instincts flaring. The group's demands piled up. Extra fries, no salt, then more salt, a burger remade because it looked wrong. Lily darted between tables, her breath quickening, panic creeping into her eyes. Ethan stepped in, delivering a plate with a polite, "Here you go," but the wiry guy shoved it back. "This is cold, kid. You trying to rip us off?" Ethan kept his cool, voice steady. "I'll get you a new one, sir." He turned to leave, but a beefy man in the group stood, shoving Ethan hard enough to send him stumbling into a chair. "Don't walk away when I'm talking," the man bellowed, drawing gasps from nearby tables. Keanu was on his feet in an instant, crossing the room in 3 strides. "That's enough," he said, his voice low but carrying an edge that silenced the room. "You're done here. Leave." The wiry guy laughed, pulling out his phone and hitting record. "Oh, look at this. Big man thinks he's the boss. What's your name, huh? I'm posting this. Reeves' retreat is trash and everyone's gonna know it." The beefy one sneered, stepping closer. "You kick us out, we'll sue this dump into the ground. Your staff sucks, deal with it." Lily shrank back, tears welling up, while Ethan steadied himself, rubbing his arm. Keanu didn't flinch, his gaze locked on the wiry guy's phone. "Go ahead," he said, calm but unyielding. "Record it, post it, sue me if you want, but you don't get to harass my people. Get out, or I call the cops." The group faltered, caught off guard by his resolve. The woman in the back muttered, "Let's go," tugging at the beefy guy's sleeve, but the wiry one kept filming, his smirk fading as Keanu stood firm. "You'll regret this," he spat, pocketing the phone, but the threat rang hollow. They shuffled out, tossing insults over their shoulders, leaving the dining room in stunned silence. Keanu turned to Lily and Ethan, his jaw tight. "You okay?" he asked. They nodded, shaken but grateful. The video threat loomed, a new pressure pressing down, but Keanu's resolve didn't waver. He'd face it head-on. Keanu didn't let the hostile group's threats rattle him. As their taunts faded into the parking lot, he stayed calm, watching Lily and Ethan recover from the ordeal. He stepped outside, phone in hand, and called his lawyer. "They're bluffing. Handle it," he said firmly, then hung up, already plotting his next move. This wasn't just about dodging a lawsuit. It was about reclaiming what Reeves' retreat stood for. Back inside, he gathered the staff in the kitchen after closing. Lily, Ethan, and a few others stood around, weary but listening. "I let this play slide too long," Keanu started, hands in his pockets. "That ends now. Ethan, you're assistant manager, starting today. You've got guts and heart." Ethan blinked, stunned. "For real?" Keanu nodded. "Lily, you've carried too much. You're getting a raise. With a soul here." Her eyes glistened, a quiet "thank you" slipping out. "And Sarah's our new manager tomorrow. Tough fare, one of us," he added. The group murmured approval, tension easing. "We've got a mess to fix. Bad reps, bad days. Next Saturday we're doing a thank you day. Free food open to everyone. We show them who we are." Ethan grinned. "That's wild." Keanu smirked. "Wild works." The week sped by with Keanu pitching in, scrubbing tables, tweaking menus, welcoming new hires. Sarah arrived, a steady hand with a warm edge, smoothing out the chaos. By Saturday, the restaurant shone, ready for its reboot. Crowds filled the lot, locals, families, skeptics, drawn by free meals and curiosity. Lily served with a real smile. Ethan ran the kitchen like he'd been born for it, and Keanu watched, coffee in hand, feeling the warmth he'd missed. The day hummed with life, a stark contrast to the strain of before. Mid-afternoon, the wiry guy from the hostile group showed up alone, hands shoved in his pockets. Keanu met him at the door. "Food or fight?" he asked, voice even. The guy shifted, awkward. "Heard about this. Didn't think you'd pull it off. That video? I scrapped it. No lawsuit either." "This isn't what I expected." Keanu nodded. "Grab a burger, see it through." The guy hesitated, then joined the line, the conflict fizzling out under the weight of goodwill. As dusk settled, Keanu pulled Lily and Ethan aside. "You've held this place up through the worst," he said, handing them envelopes. "A week off, paid wherever you want. You're worth more than cash." Lily's tears fell freely. Ethan laughed in disbelief. "You're nuts," he said, but took it with a grin. Near closing, an older man approached Lily, his coat threadbare. "You don't know me," he said softly. She frowned. "A year back, I was here, lost everything. You stayed late, talked to me, brought coffee. It pulled me through my darkest day." Lily gasped, hand to her mouth. "I didn't realize." He smiled. These small, human threads, was the real Reeves Retreat, not the bottom line. He'd guard it fiercely. Keanu's journey at Reeves Retreat reveals a timeless truth. True strength lies not in profit or power, but in lifting others up when they're down. His fight wasn't just for a restaurant, it was for dignity, for the unseen struggles of people like Lily and Ethan. In life, we often chase success, forgetting that real victories come from compassion, from seeing and valuing those around us. This story urges us to pause, listen, and act, not with grand gestures, but with quiet, steady care. Imagine a world where we all did that. Workplaces would heal, communities would thrive. Thanks for joining us on this ride. Your support means everything. Drop a comment below. What's your takeaway? Hit subscribe for more stories that hit the heart, and let's keep building something real together. See you next time.